All right, so while we get set up for our next speaker, I will introduce R.J. Andrews. R.J. Andrews is a practicing data storyteller who helps organizations solve high-stakes problems by using visual metaphors and information graphics, including charts, diagrams, and maps. He recently produced designs for the White House and MIT, and RJ's first original artwork, an elevation map of California created on an antique typewriter, it's wonderful actually, was just acquired by the David Rumsey Map Collection for Stanford University. RJ is also the person who has created the wonderful keepsake that each of you have. And so I would encourage you to increase its future value by at some point having RJ sign it for you. RJ's passion is studying the history of information graphics. He has published Information Graphic Visionaries, a new book series celebrating 3 spectacular data visualization creators, Emma Willard, Florence Nightingale, and E.J. Marey. Each volume has new writing, complete visual catalogs, and discoveries never seen by the public. Today, RJ will lead us on an historical tour of circular statistical graphics. He'll explore how the allure of the circle evolved over time and how it was often replaced by more rigid rectangular forms. Through this journey, he'll challenge the norms of chart design and help us rediscover the beauty and function of the circle in statistical representation. The title of RJ's talk today is Don't Be a Square, Circular Delights from the Analog Age of Information Graphics. Please join me in welcoming RJ Andrews.
Circles are alluring forms. They're powerful. They attract your attention. They're almost mystical in their geometric perfection. But look around. Look around. We don't live in a circular world. Our buildings are square. Our screens are square. Our pixels are square. And our charts are square. It wasn't always like that, though. Once upon a time, statistical graphics embraced more imaginative shapes, and circular design stood out as creative and captivating. Back then, the marginal cost of doing something different, of experimenting with graphics, wasn't that high. The designer's pencil could furnish something weird, nearly as easy as reproducing a rote bar chart. They had builder squares, but they had drafting compasses too. Today, I want to show you some of those circular diagrams. And we're going to start right where Gilles left off. And you're going to have to forgive me as I try to flip through using a mouse. So here's an example of a circular diagram. Now, today we're going to sort of cast context and even content aside to focus on form. Look at this wedge. Look at how it pierces it. It looks like that orange that we began with, doesn't it? Now this is a detail, right? That comes from a bigger map. And that's what we're going to do for this presentation. Look at a lot of circular details. Here's another one. Now this is crazy. We have one wedge shooting out this way, and it has a little blue hat. And then a tower bisects the 2 wedges. And then there's a foundational solid wedge. And even though it's small, it's in some sort of artistic compositional balance because it's so dark. Just a little bit later, also in Paris, W.E.B. Du Bois brings his magnificent charts. And there are quite a lot of circles, aren't there? So, how did we get to all of these circular diagrams? By the end of the 19th century, there were so many. There was an explosion of circular diagrams. And we can't look at all of them, but we can start to look at how we got here. So let's go all the way back. Origins. In 1801, William Playfair published a statistical breviary. And in it was not 1, but 3 circular diagrams. And this is the first of them. And it shows the Turkish Empire, and it shows its various land holdings across 3 different continents. And you can see this big, strong black line intersecting with the African label. Now, Playfair collaborated in the next year with Donant to translate this into French, and Donant's engraver corrected that. Now we know Playfair didn't really make this correction because Playfair was in debtor's prison when this was done. And so Donant's engraver takes Africa and lifts it up. And so this is a good reminder that the name that's above the line, the name that's on the title page, isn't always the name of the person who's doing the really good work. And then darkness. Oh, excuse me. And then Playfair in 1805, a few years later, publishes his last circular diagram. And this is showing the different states in America and the different territories by their land holdings. Now, what's really interesting about Playfair is he teaches us the first lesson of circular diagrams, is that circles are perfect for showing part-to-whole relationships. You know, you can have 100% of a rectangle, but the rectangle size is arbitrary. Why not just have a bigger rectangle? A circle, you can't have more than 100% of 360 degrees. It doesn't exist. And so the circle's form is perfect for part-to-whole relationships. All right, let's get into that darkness. From 1805 for a generation, I can't find anything in the record in terms of really fantastic circular diagrams. But the silence is broken. We're back to France by André-Michel Gary. And he publishes a paper, and that paper has a fold out of all these diagrams, and there's mostly like charting the weather. Why? Well, we had a lot of data about the weather. And he's looking for correlations using bar charts and using circular diagrams. So let's look at his circular diagrams. The top row shows the days that the wind blew in Paris across the 4 seasons using multiple years of data. Now, Gary teaches us the second lesson of circular diagrams, is that they're really good at conveying certain natural metaphors. And so here he's using a compass rose or a wind rose metaphor to show the direction that the wind blows. Now, these look the same from a form perspective, but they're actually operating the lower row on a completely different visual metaphor. What are they doing? This is births on the left, deaths on the right, and it's showing you what time of day that the births and deaths happen. So we're no longer looking at a compass rose, we are looking at a clock, okay? And notice that there are some data gaps at midnight and at noon, and Gary partially explains this away, talking about how there's a stigma about dying at noon because that's when public executions happen. And then we're off to the races. In 1833, back in London, Luke Howard shows the temperature of London in this incredibly sophisticated, beautiful diagram. You know, and it should remind you of the different climate change spirals that we see today of temperature circling around the year. In the same year, Desjardins teaches us the next lesson about circular diagrams. They're very, very good at packing in certain information because you have a little bit of information on the inside, and so you need a small radius. You only need a small radius to fit it all in. And then on the outside, you have more and more information. And so the growing radius of the circles helps you pack in all the information. Like Playfair, Desjardins had a few bites at the apple. First in German. And if you're trying to pack in information, I look at this, and maybe Desjardins looked at this, and he probably saw a problem. There was some empty space. And so what do we do with that empty space? Well, I look at this chart, and I think it's missing something. It's missing more flags. And so what we need is we need more flags. And more flags made it out of Germany and came back to France. Now, these are not just showy displays, they're also being used for science. And so Léon Lalande publishes dozens and dozens of these beautiful little, cute little charts at the end of a book, a translation of Kamp's Meteorology. And these are all in the back, and they all fold out, and they're all numbered, and you know they reference all different sections of the book. And in all these dozens and dozens of cute little diagrams, there are some circular diagrams. And these are much more technical than what we've seen so far. And these two were picked out. They were plucked out of this book, and a few years later, put into another, you know, sort of more sophisticated printing, where you have these redrawn with nicer, finer lines, enlarged, really, really pretty. And a few years later, a couple decades later, this approach is used where? So here's a port, and we're French civil engineers. We're trying to design infrastructure for this port, and it's useful to know what way the wind blows. And so what do we have in the top corner? We have a circular diagram. And knowing which way the wind blows in what season helps you understand how easy it is for ships to arrive and leave from this port. And this is really interesting because you can see that it imitates the Lalande illustration from a couple decades before. But this is an obscure chart, right? Not many people have ever shown this chart in a presentation before. But do you know what people have seen? Is that a few years later, this chart is plucked out by Marey. And Marey makes a cartoon version of it and includes it in his graphic method. And so this is secretly a book talk. And this is the first plug for our graphic method. And so if you want to learn more about E.J. Marey and his cartoons of famous charts, in some cases preserving charts for us to know them because the originals are lost, you can look at the book at the back of the room. Story time. Britain's greatest statistical talent, epidemiologist William Farr, started flirting with data visualization in the early 1840s. And he made some crude bar charts and some area graphs. In the early 1850s, he does a beautiful multicolor publication on cholera. And this is one of the tableaus in his cholera work. And we can see that he has these filled areas, and they sort of evoke that Luke Howard temperature of London that we saw earlier, right? But it's not the only one he includes. It's not the only circular diagram he includes in the cholera report. He also has this. Deaths of different plagues over the years. You can see all this deaths spiking around the calendar. And to my eye, this might remind us a little bit of Gary's original work and sort of its sparse minimalism. But the Gary-Farr connection is even more important because Farr's cholera report comes out in 1852. Who visited London in 1851, the year before, bringing all of his charts to the Crystal Palace, putting them on display, but Gary. And then Gary and Farr would go on to collaborate in Gary's final magnum opus work. And so there's a personal connection between Farr and Gary. And maybe there's not a graphic smoking gun saying that this definitely came from that, but there is some human relationship there. But there are graphic smoking guns, aren't there? Let's look at one. William Farr teams up with a returning war hero named Florence Nightingale. A few years later, beginning at the end of 1856, they meet at a dinner party and they enter into a pact. Nightingale is obsessed with improving the health of the army. Farr is obsessed in improving the health of all civilians. And they agree to work together, Nightingale bringing military data, Farr bringing his civilian data. This is one of the early diagrams that they worked on. And this is a draft. This is all hand-drawn. And you can see that it's very, very close to his cholera work. Here's another chart that they drew. Again, this is a hand-drawn draft. And you can see the similarity in the design. And we know that they're working together, but that's not enough. In the draft, they have a note, and they actually reference the cholera report. They say, hey, do that. So Nightingale and Farr published their charts. They publish it in two different places. One in an official report, which is very thick and has fold-out charts, and then one in an unofficial report that's designed to look like an official report. And it's the second report with its bigger trim size that was most widely distributed to promote Nightingale's cause. So we have the same charts, two different reports. Here they are. There's the published version, but there's a problem with this version. Let's see the problem. There. This is how data is encoded along these rays. That's how data was encoded in Farr's chart, in Farr's cholera chart. But the problem is they gussied up the graphic and they filled in all the area. So when you look at this chart, you don't really see the rays. What you do is you see the area, like this. And that's how we interpret this graph, and that exaggerates numbers, and it was a big problem. It's not a big problem now, it was a big problem then. Farr and Nightingale were criticized. They had correspondence about what are we going to do to correct this encoding error. And so they have a quick fix, and issue an errata note, and the errata note explains to you how to read a graphic. And if you have to explain to somebody how to read a graphic, well, your graphic has failed, hasn't it? They get another bite at the apple. They start drawing more. And when I say they start drawing more, what I really mean is James Lewis starts drawing more, and F.J. Williams starts drawing more. Farr's team of clerks, those are the hands who are actually drawing this. Harrison and Sons, who is lithographing these. And so they correct the encoding, and they're on their way to making an iconic chart. Now, if you've seen Florence Nightingale's rose chart, you've probably seen this one in the middle. This is usually plucked out all by itself, but it's really not meant to be read by itself. It's really the middle act of a 3-act play. Act 1, there's a lot of death. Act 2, here are the causes of the death. Notice how so many of these causes are preventable. And then Act 3, we did something about it and we solved it. There's not a lot of death anymore. And so there's a 1, 2, 3-act play happening across these charts. Now, Nightingale teaches us the next lesson for circular diagrams, which is that they're bullseyes for attention. Like they attract you. They have these like just incredible centers that just like pull your eye in, you know. And the criticism of Nightingale, you know, across the last decade or so is like, it should have been a line chart. Well, Nightingale's competitors, who she was reacting to when she made these charts, had very similar data, and this is how they represented it, as line charts. You've never seen these before. These are not famous. These did not survive the test of time. Once again, they're published in several places. So one of the things that I want to highlight through this talk is the role of iteration, and how iteration is not only so important in improving design, but understanding the decisions that designers are making. So first, they're not published in this non-public report that went directly to the Queen. And then Nightingale issues her own big scale version. And this one's the nicest version because the pages aren't folded. So they're nice and clean designs. And then finally, and you can see one of these real ones in the case right over there, the charts are slid into a book written for English soldiers to read. And so these 3 publications have very, very different audiences. It's sort of a separate talk, but Nightingale, you know, as genius as a graphic mind she was particularly genius at promoting her charts and getting them in front of the right people. And so she's putting them in different places for different people to read them. Again, secret book talk. We've reproduced the double foldouts of Nightingale and Farr in the book that you can see once again in the back of the room. At the same time that all this is happening, a French retired civil engineer, about, I think in 1858, maybe 80 years old, starts putting circular diagrams on maps. And so this is Menard's meat map, and you can see the last thing that circular diagrams are really phenomenal at, which is encoding data as marks on a map, because they have that perfect center of attention, so you can locate it right over a particular town or particular city. And what I really love about the way that Menard does his circular diagrams is that the black sort of has this gravity and just settles in at the bottom of each circle. Menard does a couple circular diagrams on maps. Here's another one. I particularly like this color palette. And then there's that explosion. So the 1860s, 70s, 80s, 90s, all the way up to 1900, you know, there's just dozens and dozens of crazy, beautiful, crazy, weird circular diagrams. We can't look at all of them today, but I wanted to spend sort of the end, looking at one of my favorites. This one's also, you can see the real deal right over there in that case. And so this is a popularity of different theaters in Paris across a number of years. And so you have all the theaters in Paris, and each chart is located where the theater is. And so here's the opera, and it's over the opera. And you can see that focus of attention. Let's zoom in and look at one of the details. And why not go to the Folies Bergère, right? Let's all go to the Folies Bergère. Wouldn't that be nice? Okay, so how does this chart work? What I love about this is it's only the top half of the circle. And so that creates that center of attention right over where the Follies still is today. But it also preserves the left to right reading of time, right? Now let's look at the color. We have 2 outlier years in gold, and the outlier years are years of the Paris Expo. That's when more people were coming to Paris. And so those are different. There's a reason why these wedges are so large, okay? And then we have an average line, okay, going all the way through the red years, but not counting the outlying years. It's a really, really beautiful graphic. And it's hard to show this on a screen or on Zoom. Please go see the real thing. But the red and the gold are so vibrant and so beautiful, and yet they don't just allow you to read the base map underneath them. It's just a really, really beautiful work. All right, so what happened? What happened? Well, World War I happened. World War I sucked a lot of life out of the world. The Great War just sucked all this color out of the world, and a different world emerged. It was a world that needed data visualization, but didn't need beautiful data visualization. So coming out of World War I, we get these. These are textbooks. They're all textbooks, mostly targeted at businessmen about how to use charts to do their business. It's all black and white, rote, simple charts. A lot of these books say don't use circular diagrams. This happens. The infamous monopoly meatpacking company, Swift & Company, it advertises its, internal accounting by issuing these coins, big circular diagram. And what I love about this is the precision with which it's using 12.96% of every dollar. But they too get an iteration in the next year. That 12.96 just becomes a 13. And around this time, I can stop saying circular diagrams and I can start saying pie charts, about 120 years after their invention. It wasn't all bad though. The Western empires have switched to sort of corporate brutalism, but there's still experiments happening around the world. And so just to get a hint of some of the magic that continues across the 20th century, I want to look at a couple circular diagrams from the Journal of Justice out of Istanbul. And try making these on a computer. It's very hard, very expensive to do this. But if you have a pencil, if you have a pen, then maybe it's not so hard. Maybe you can still make these, to me, batshit crazy diagrams. So in conclusion, don't be a square. Thank you.